Our next speaker is Chief Judge Devon, and we are so honored to have her here today. She is, I don't have my paper up here, so that's going to tell me all the things that she does, but she is the Chief Judge of our Intertribal Courts here in San Diego. She is an ICWA attorney for many years. She also happened to start the American Indian Recruitment Program at San Diego State after she and her husband Dwight graduated. They have brought probably hundreds to thousands of youth to college. They have a commitment. They travel to the different universities. She is starting a youth wellness court so that our Native youth will not get put into the state system, the county system, to be able to bring that wellness back to the youth. She has so many things to share with you, so I'm going to stop talking and bring her up. Thank you so much.
Hello, good morning. My name is Devon Lomayesva. I'm from the Santa Isabel Reservation, also known as Ikwanan. We have a few of our tribal members here this morning. It's great to see all of you. So when Tamara first asked me to do this, I said, well, who's the audience? And she said, well, it's a whole bunch of future social workers. So I really wanted to put together a presentation that made sense for all of you. And my career has taken me a lot of different places, and I certainly have had a lot of experience with working with social workers in the various counties that I've worked in. So I'm really hoping that this presentation today will be something that's beneficial for those of you that are going to be starting your careers in the various counties, and also for those of you that are our tribal people that work in the system with our Indian children, and those of you that are community members that are looking for ways to support our Native children, and that also that just want answers to what happens to our Native children when they go into the system, and what are ways that we can prevent them from going into the system. Because really that's my goal, is how can we prevent them from going into the system? And you as social workers, that's also part of what you do. You have the ability to prevent them from going into the system. And that's another tool of ICWA. So as we go through this, I hope that we can all leave this understanding that that's another thing that we can work together to do. So with that, okay, the PowerPoint's behind me, so give me a minute to, I haven't memorized it, almost. So I'm gonna kind of look behind me for a second. So another thing that I kind of put together with this presentation is some of the, I call it implicit bias that I've experienced along my career. I've been practicing Indian law for 23 or so years. So I'm still a practicing attorney. I've also been chief judge for the Intertribal Court for a little over 8 years now. So I've seen the state court side and the tribal court side of child welfare. I've practiced in primarily Riverside County, but I've also appeared in San Diego, Orange, Riverside, Riverside mostly, San Bernardino, Los Angeles, and several counties throughout the United States. And I will tell you, and many of you probably already know this, that no county is the same. And even within the counties, the different departments and the different courtrooms are even very different. You know, judges do what they want to do, and they run their courtrooms very differently. So as social workers, you know, you're going to experience how judges are different, how county counsel's different, and you're going to have to adapt to that. But you still need to remember the requirements of ICWA. And as we'll see, it's not just ICWA, it's California law, because California is very, I guess you could use the word progressive in understanding of ICWA. And so a lot of the provisions of ICWA are now in California law. Okay, so here we go. So next slide, please. So I use this because this is kind of telling about my experience and a lot of Native people's experience when you're going in there and representing a tribe. Because a lot of times, this is what they expect when the tribes are involved. They expect you to show up looking like this. They're like, well, we don't see the tribe. Well, what are you looking for? Okay, so keep in mind that Native people they look like me, okay? They look like everyday people, and we don't wear regalia or ceremonial clothes. Not everybody wears, our ribbon skirts every day or our willow skirts, depending on where you are, okay? So not everybody wears turquoise jewelry every day. So those are the things that I call, again, implicit bias. So don't be looking out for that. Many years ago, there was this doctrine created called the Existing Indian Family Doctrine. Thank goodness it's not around anymore. But just keep this in mind, keep this slide in mind as you go through your career, and that this is not what you're looking for. You're looking for those representatives that tell you they're there on behalf of the tribe. Next slide, please. So you have to understand the history of Native people if you're going to be able to work with Indian people. I know you don't get this in elementary school because it's just not happening. It's starting slowly, but you have to understand California history for Native people is different than the history of Native people where we learn about the Pilgrims. We don't have that history. Ours is different. There is a lot of similarities, though. The policies of the federal government with generally, as you see here, just simply annihilation to assimilation with policies of allotment, breaking up Indian lands, the boarding school eras, Indian relocation programs, termination of tribes, basically getting rid of that form of tribal government, and then into the stage that we are at now, which is self-determination, which is kind of coming back to empowering tribal governments to once again be able to govern our own affairs. So it's important to understand the history and the Indian policies that the federal government has put down for Indian tribes over the history of this country. Next slide, please. And I'm going to eventually get to my own PowerPoint here. Okay, so this is just some pictures that show you kind of pre and post boarding school. Next slide, please. Next slide. Just kind of threw in some pictures here just to give you some context. So I'm sure that you will get some ICWA training, and one thing I want to say about that is, in my experience, when you get placed, whatever county you're in, again, it's going to be very different in the types of ICWA training that you're offered, but I can tell you this. Wherever you end up going, no matter what your supervisor tells you, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever that you cannot get no-cost ICWA training for wherever you are, because I can name countless entities that will come to you to offer training that have Indian people that are trained, that have been doing the training for years and years. There's also the statewide ICWA conference that's been going for decades. There's numerous entities now, and there's numerous guides on the Indian Child Welfare Act. There's just a ton of information out there. There's also a lot of models for MOUs out there that tribes that work with their counties very closely. One tribe that I work with actually has MOUs with the county. They have quarterly meetings with county council, with ICWA supervisors, even with probation for those delinquency cases, to make sure that we're talking about challenges and things that are going good. So it's not just negative, it's also positive things that are happening, so that there's a good exchange, and so that the tribal social workers, the caseworkers, are getting to know, the workers that are being assigned those tribal cases. So ICWA was passed in 1978. So in retrospect, I guess that wasn't a long time ago, but then again, that was kind of a long time ago in the sense that you would think by now that the courts and the departments would know that this law exists and that it needs to be implemented. But unfortunately, there's still a constant need to re-educate and reiterate to the courts and to the departments that this is something, it's not optional. It's not something that you can decide whether or not you want to apply. The forms, when you start working in this area, yeah, there's a lot of forms. You can't get away from forms. That's just part of how it works. But there's mandated inquiries. You have to ask if there's Indian ancestry. But in order to do that properly, you have to know what you're asking about. And unfortunately, that's where I see a lot of things go wrong. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So the history behind ICWA, really recognized some things that were touched on earlier, that, it goes back to kind of some of those policies, the boarding schools, and the ripping apart of our tribal governments and our tribal lands, and therefore our people. And there was a recognition that there's no resource more vital to the continued existence and integrity of Indian tribes than our Indian children. If you rip the children out, and the numbers were staggering at the percentages of Indian children that were just taken, rounded up literally like cattle, and taken away for the sole purpose of taking away their native identity so that they could live like the non-Indian, like white people lived. That was the sole purpose. There's no dispute about that. And if that's gone, then the whole Indian identity and way of life is gone, with that being the goal. So ICWA recognized that. That was the whole point, was to keep Indian children in their Indian homes. And so with those recognitions, there was the recognition also that there was a failure of states to recognize those essential tribal relations of Indian people and the cultural and social standards prevailing. So after the boarding school era and just the essential rounding up of Indian children had stopped, there were still the state's social welfare systems going out and removing Indian children, now not to go to boarding schools, but now saying, oh, you're mistreating your children, you're abusing your children. Well, why? Well, because, you have too many people living in this house, because you have dirt floors, because your food is being kept, on the floor, or because, you're not going to school because you're doing these ceremonies. You kind of get the picture, right? So, because that's how we live. And our kids are happy, they're healthy. So it was putting a different cultural lens onto our people. And that happened throughout the country, and it still happens today. It's kind of, but this child will live a better and a, quote, richer life with this family than they will with this family. That's not the standard. It's not if they'll have a better life under your standards. It's, are they going to be safe? Are they going to be taken care of? That's the standard you're looking for. It's not, they're going to have a better school. They're going to get to go to a private school. They're going to get to have nicer cars. No, that's not the standard. So keep that in mind. I am not, a licensed social worker or psychologist or any of that, but any of us can read the studies that parental alienation, all these things that are coming out now about we have to think a lot longer and harder before we remove, because that instance is causing a lot more harm sometimes than the harm that we believe is happening in the home. So a lot more is coming to light now as we look at those instances that are happening. And I could talk all day, and there's many people out here and tribal people in the room that know much more about this than I do, about there's other things that you can do than remove. But that's another topic for another day. But it's that recognition through ICWA that there are other things that we can do within our Native communities other than taking children out of the home. So the policy of ICWA is to protect the best interest of Indian children and promote that stability and security of Indian tribes and their families. Next slide, please. So this has always been the rub. A lot of people don't like this. People don't like when they feel like somebody else is getting something that they're not. It's like two little kids like, well, why do they get the red one and I get the ugly yellow one? Why do they get the pretty doll with the pink dress and I get, the orange one? It's like, well, why do Indians get a special law and I don't? Well, look at the history. Look at the legalities of it. So again, why do Indians get a, quote, special law? Well, it's not a special law. It's just the law. Under Clause 3, Section 8, Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, it provides that Congress has the power to regulate commerce with Indian tribes, and through this and other constitutional authority, Congress has plenary power over Indian affairs. Translated, Indians are the only body of people that are in the U.S. Constitution. Tribes have a special government-to-government relation with the U.S. Why is that? Well, because we ceded our lands in exchange. There was a contract. There were promises made for the taking of our lands. No other group of people in this country can say that. So there's a whole different history. There's a whole body of federal Indian law that set this entire premise up for generations and generations ago. So that is why Indian people are different legally than anyone else. So that is why ICWA is constitutional, even though they keep trying to say it's not. But we keep winning, and we're going to keep fighting to maintain that. So, all right. So that's number one. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is just kind of how the ICWA process goes in a dependency proceeding. So there's a removal. This is not in order. I don't know how that got there. So how it really should happen is, there's a referral, show up, somebody calls in, you visit the home, and you're really trying to do all the prevention. You're trying to keep the child in the home. And honestly, before you even go out to visit a home, if you have any idea before you go out that it's an Indian child, you should do your best to find out and contact the tribe. I know in Riverside with the tribe that I work with, a lot of times because of the tribe's advocacy, they may know that it's that tribe, and they pretty much know that you probably better not go out there unless you call the tribe. And it works out, trust me, a lot better for you in the long run. But if you do kind of start driving out, and for some reason what wasn't put together initially, and then you realize you're going onto the reservation, you still could make a call, and I will bet that someone in your office is going to know who to contact. So do your best to try to do that beforehand. So there's a whole lot you can do ahead of time, but just if you're going to always want to inquire as to Indian heritage, and don't try to make determinations on your own about enrollment or membership, or are you eligible? That doesn't matter. If there's Indian heritage, that's all you need to know, okay? So you have to give notice to tribes. All these other things kind of get more into the legal parts of it, but there have to be qualified Indian expert witnesses. There have to be active efforts to prevent the breakup of Indian families. Active efforts is one of those things that even as lawyers and judges, it's still kind of, people have different interpretations about what active efforts means. And trust me, that will be something that you too will probably scratch your head about. But for me, active efforts is you have to work with the tribes. And sending a letter or making one phone call, that's not active efforts. Giving a tribal person, a bus pass and sending them a list of referrals, that's not active efforts. You have to work with the tribes and you have to document that. So once you get into working with this and you start working with Native trainers, you will learn what the tribes will tell you active efforts are. It's engaging, and simply paper pushing, that's not active efforts. Tribes don't work that way. Tribes are governments. They get massive amounts of paper and emails every day. So to think that just sending something that way is active efforts is crazy to think that that works. Now, once you establish relationships with tribes, they'll be looking for it. They'll know it's you, but you have to work on that relationship first. Okay. And then once you get into the actual proceedings and you have established that there's jurisdiction over the case, you'll get into the dispositional considerations, which means, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to look for guardianships? Are you going to look for adoption, tribal customary adoption? Next slide, please. And that's when you can consider or transferring to tribal court. So there's all these different kinds of options that you have. Let's see. I won't spend a lot of time on these other options because I want to talk about tribal court. So the one that I see most often is guardianship, because guardianship does not sever parental rights, and honestly, most tribes do not want to sever parental rights. That provides, this is granted that the parent doesn't successfully complete their services and reunify. That's always our goal. I mean, sometimes, if the parent has passed away or they're going to be incarcerated for a really long time, then more than likely they're not going to be able to reunify. But granted, they don't succeed in services, then you're looking at guardianship with grandma, auntie, uncle, who knows. Short of that, tribes have other options. Tribal customary adoption, which is an option under state law, which also does not terminate parental rights. Don't want to spend a ton of time going into this, but this was an option that tribes like because it's permanent, but it doesn't sever parental rights, which was leading to issues with, for some tribes, membership and probate issues, like being able to take certain lands, and it was just causing some issues that would interfere with other tribal rights that belonged to that child. But when those termination of parental rights happened, it was causing problems. So this kind of fixed that. So that was a really good fit for some tribes. And then sometimes other tribes prefer just regular traditional adoption. So that's an option as well. For transferring to tribal court, as I said earlier, some counties are night and day. Some tribes we walk into when we have, a new case, and they're like, okay, are you guys transferring this to tribal court? We're like, whoa, no, not today. And others, they're just like, bam, bam, let's just get straight to the case. So it just depends on the court and the relationships that you're building, and I guess, how invested those counties or those courtrooms are in understanding and wanting to understand the ICWA. But I will tell you this, and this is really, I guess, really more directed to those Indian social workers out there, but also for those that are gonna work for the department. If you go into court and you don't say anything, then obviously nobody's gonna hear you. You have to use your voice, you have to speak up, and you have to be an advocate. I don't know how many times I've been in court and I've seen on both sides, for the tribes or for the county, sitting in the back, the social workers, the caseworkers, and even tribal attorneys, they sit there the entire hearing and they don't say anything. And then they go back and they wonder why things didn't go their way. You have to speak up. You have to speak up. And the judge might be like, who cares? You have to raise your hand to go like this. Whatever you have to do, jump up and down. Because if you don't get what you need to on the record, nobody's gonna hear you, and you don't get a do-over. The case has been heard, and it's really hard to go back because things move really fast. So if you have a relationship with one of the attorneys, and I know how it is because it's scary. Trust me, I worked at California Indian Legal Services, and they just throw you in and you sink or swim. And it's scary just to go and just be like the only one. And it's scary when it's your first few weeks on the job. But, you know, if you feel that you're not doing your job or somebody's not letting you do your job, and I tell you, those panel attorneys, the minor's attorney and the parent's attorneys, sometimes they can be scary because they're all there, they're every day, all day, and they know what they're doing, and they're getting their clients through, and they're advocating for their clients. But they're nice, trust me. I've gotten to know a lot of them. It's just that they know the system. But if you say, excuse me, they'll stop and they'll let you know what's going on. So don't be afraid to ask questions and use your voice, and eventually you'll make some friends in the court, and then it'll be so much easier. Trust me, make some friends. Even if it's the bailiff, knowing the bailiff is cool too, because they have a lot of power in there. All right, next slide. Okay, so an area that's always been a little bit, you know, of an anomaly, and don't forget that ICWA does also apply to delinquency. So when kids get in trouble, right? Now, technically, ICWA only applies to delinquency in what you call status offenses. So something that wouldn't otherwise be a crime. So like, being truant from school, things like that. But I will tell you, the vast majority of courts, where one of the tribes that I work for, we just show up. And they're like, oh, the tribe's here. Okay. Did you want a copy of the report? And you just go along with it. And they're like, the tribe's here to help. You know, sometimes they've been, well, the tribe hasn't intervened. We don't know if this is an ICWA case. And the judge is like, well, okay, well, what does the tribe want to do? Hey, we're just here to offer support for the minor because we know their family. We know where they're at. We know what services. We know what their needs are. We know their service providers. We know what Indian Health can offer, and they're like, oh, well, this is great information. So again, you just go in there, you be honest, you say what you have to offer. And, sometimes you have those dual cases where you're in both courts. So you just never know. So just be confident, always be honest. And, again, a lot of you have heard the spirit of ICWA. The spirit of ICWA boils down to what is best for the Indian child, right? It's surrounding the child with all the resources that you can. That's what it means. Okay, next slide. And Tamara, you're just gonna have to cut me off because I could talk all day. So just go like this and tell me to, okay. Okay, alrighty, so let's see. So The number one reason that ICWA cases get appealed is because there is a lack of appropriate notice to the tribes. And going back to what I was saying earlier, it really boils down to a lack of knowledge about tribes overall. In previous studies, and I will admit this slide's a little bit old because I've given parts of this presentation before, but when kind of a survey was done some years ago, a lot of social workers said, well, I just have too many cases and I don't have time to put extra work into ICWA cases, so I don't always really do a lot to ask about Indian ancestry. I think it's getting a little bit better, at least from my point of view, but again, it's very county specific. If you talk to a tribal attorney, you know, in some other counties, more up north, they probably won't have the same opinion as I do, but we have 52 counties in this state, and again, they're all very different. But the last part, I think, is really important. An unfamiliarity with tribal lands and tribal cultures. So I put, for example, Sioux, Apache, Mission, Indigeno. Does anybody want to tell me why I put those up there? Anybody? Is there one Sioux tribe? There's a whole bunch of Sioux tribes. So if I tell you, oh, I'm Sioux, what's your next question going to be? Well, which one? And if they say, I don't know, then what are you going to do? You're going to go find out what every Sioux tribe is, and you're going to notice every single one of them. That's what you're going to do. What if I say I'm Apache? Same thing. What if I say I'm Mission Indian? You're going to have a lot of work to do. How many tribes are you going to notice if I say I'm Mission Indian? Thank you. Yeah, 100, 109, 10. You know, we're debating on the number here, but you're going to notice a lot. Now, you're going to probably try to do a little bit more research on the history and maybe like, well, can you narrow that down? Like, was your family from Southern California? Or, you know, again, that will go into your knowledge of Native people, and there's training out there for this. And then down here, you know, earlier when, you know, the prayer was being offered and Chairman Christman was speaking, you know, you're hearing Kumeyaay, Ipai, Tipai, Digeno. You know, there's a lot of different references to our tribal people down here, and a lot of people refer to themselves in different ways. You have to be aware of that. You have to. And if you're not, you're going to trip yourself up, and it's just going to cause delay. And who does that hurt? It hurts the child, and it hurts the family. So I can't say enough about that. Okay, next slide. Okay. This is just some more reiteration of what I kind of already talked about. So the rights of tribes in ICWA cases, tribes have the right to intervene. What does that mean? It means tribes are a party. They have a right at the table. If you are there as a social worker, understand that sometimes tribes might not have attorneys. Attorneys are expensive. Luckily, there was recently a law passed where there's funding for tribes to have attorneys, but all the kinks haven't been worked out. So there will be tribes that will appear through their tribal representative. It may or may not be a social worker. It might be the tribal chairperson. But that tribal representative has the right to speak. They shouldn't be relegated to the back of the room. They should be able to be somewhere up there, and they are a party. If they have intervened, they should be able to be a party. Now, there's some nuances about legal documents and stuff, but they should still have equal rights to speak in that case. Tribal social workers might not be Native, okay? Tribes can hire whoever they want to be their tribal social worker, okay? So keep that in mind. Tribal attorneys might be Native, might be non-Native. And there's a lot of virtual appearances, especially after COVID now. And then there's also a law that allows tribes to appear virtually because it's really expensive. And Native people don't all live on the reservation. In fact, most Native people live off the reservation. So you're going to have a lot of virtual appearances. So tribes need to make sure that they get their due time when they're appearing virtually. I do that actually a lot. And tribes have the right to receive the documents. If I had $1 for every time I got the report the same day as the hearing, that is just not acceptable. It is not acceptable to get the report the same day as the hearing. Legally, it's supposed to be 10 days before. But if I could just get it the day before, I'm not going to complain. But honestly, when you get a 35-page report, granted some of it's like, okay, 10 pages of their drug tests or something, but come on, everybody needs to have adequate time to look at these reports. And a lot of times there's mistakes. And I get it. We all cut and paste because you got a lot of reports to write. But it's frustrating to be expected to review these reports. And these are recommendations that a lot of times these judges are like, rubber stamp, next. And so when the tribes are looking at these, and the attorneys, you got a lot of attorneys in these cases. The tribes have attorneys. Sometimes the minors, if there's minors from different dads, which happens a lot, you might have, I had one case, I'm not even kidding you. There was 4 attorneys for 4 different daddies, and then mom, and then the tribe, and then, county council. It was like a room full of attorneys. So please get your reports done ahead of time and make sure you're getting it to the tribe. I know there's still this email thing. And remember that tribes can't get mail delivered on the reservation, so keep that in mind too. Okay, anyway, what else? Okay, so now let's go to tribal court. Next. Okay, all tribal courts do not look alike. So just go through these, keep going, you'll see different pictures of tribal courts. Next. That's my tribal court. Okay, stop here. Okay, so different types of tribal courts. Most tribal courts are authorized by the tribe themselves. There are some that are consortium courts, meaning they've joined together to share resources. There are some Code of Federal Regulation courts. And then, of course, some tribes have appeals, Supreme Courts, and then wellness and peacemaker courts. Next slide. So tribal courts operate because of the inherent authority of tribes to develop, their own justice systems, right? Tribes are nations. They can develop their own laws and courts how they see fit. Let's see. Tribal courts can look similar to Western courts. They can add in aspects of their own traditional systems of justice. They can be a combination. They can look many different ways. Some tribal courts are those of general jurisdiction, meaning that any of their laws can go to the tribal court. They can be limited, such as the Intertribal Court of Southern California, where I work. We have about 18 tribes that participate. Only 2 of them are general jurisdiction. All the others only bring some of their laws to us. And let's see. Then, of course, we have, like every other court, rules of civil procedure, rules of evidence, etc. Next slide. This is just an example of some of the types of cases that we hear: housing, elections, enrollment, peace and security codes, child welfare, conservatorships, guardianships. Next slide. Okay, and this is the part that I want to get into a little bit more. So about 6 years ago or so, started noticing within our tribal court that we were having some youth being cited in, but really the only thing that we could do would, when tribal law enforcement was citing them in for vandalism, driving under the influence, just whatever it was. And keep in mind, this is all civil-based. The tribes here are not exercising criminal jurisdiction. So all we could do was just give them a fine. So really all that would happen is that their parents or their guardian would pay their fine, and then they would just go on their way. So we said, well, what can we do to make something more impactful? Because, as you know, when kids start getting into trouble, it just usually only gets worse. Sometimes it's just kind of a one and done, but we wanted to do something that could be a little more wellness-based. So we went out and researched what would make sense for our communities? And we looked at a lot of different models. And we ultimately thought, we think a peer court model would be something that would involve more youth, because we could bring in Native youth to be the peers that kind of hand down the consequences. And it would just involve more youth, and it would be a great way to kind of hold the youth accountable within their own community. So we kind of chose this restorative justice wellness model, and we've been doing this for a couple years now. And we've had a few cases, and you kind of do these models, and you're like, oh, I can't wait till we get our first case, and it's going to be this little kid walking in, and he's going to be like, oh, thank you for bringing me to. No, not even close. We've had every single scenario except the one that we wanted to get. It's been like these little, I'm not going to do any of this stuff. And, it's like, okay, all right. Then we've gotten the ones like in this 18 to 24 range, and that's why now you see transition court, because we all know that age range, and that's why now a lot of jurisdictions are including that 18 to 24 range, because it's like, legally you're an adult, but you're still kind of developing, and you still kind of need that extra, we can take some time to think about what you've done here. So we're working with that. We're trying to make sure that we're offering different types of services, and we're not calling the 18 to 24 youth, because we all know that 18-year-olds don't want to be called kids. So we're trying to make sure that we're developing programs that fit the age and fit, the infraction, whatever act they did. But we've been pretty successful in developing some really good partnerships. We have MOUs with San Diego District Attorney, San Diego Probation, with many of the Indian health centers, and of course the tribes and our partners. We really need to just keep getting back out there and letting the tribes know that we're here. And we've worked really well with the juvenile court here in San Diego. It's just a matter of getting more and more youth into the program. But this is something that we know is needed, and we're happy that it's up and running. But we think it's a way that will provide alternatives to just kind of the, just the punitive system that's been out there for so long. We see so many different issues in our community that have just been plaguing us for so long. And I'm sure today you guys will talk more about historical trauma and some of those things that just, historically have plagued our communities with drug and alcohol abuse, suicide, all those things that are the reason that we see what we see in our tribal court system and in our child welfare system. Next slide, please. So I kind of already went through some of this. This just kind of shows our other partners. We're still working with the school districts. They've surprisingly been one of the most difficult to work with, but we're still working with the school districts to try to get youth there that are messing up in school, because school is such a hard time anyway. But schools have a lot of rules, but we just had a law day the other day, and it was really, really fun. And so we're really happy that the relationship with the school district went really good there. And just trying to expose our youth to positive things. And I think, again, it's all back to that prevention and what can we do to expose our kids to positive things. Next slide. And this was just more about the youth that we bring in to hand down the consequences to our youth offenders. These youth receive training with our partnered universities. Right now it's SDSU and UCSD, and they actually get college credit and possible high school credit when they take these courses. And we also offer a training through the court as well. And so it's kind of these win-win where they're not only part of our tribal youth court, but they're also earning credits and volunteer hours and just doing positive things in their own community. Next slide. And this is our Agave project, which is our family resource center at the court that also acts as a partner with the youth court to provide services for the youth and the family, but also is a program that supports our court parties, focusing on victims and victim services, and also just helping people maneuver the court system with figuring out how to do their forms, reports, restraining orders, things like that. We are really happy that we just had one of our first cases. They completed their hours through one of our modules, so we're really happy about that. So things are moving along. It's doing what it's supposed to do. Next slide. And I'm done. Thank you very much. Hi. Okay. So Tamara said I have a couple minutes for questions. Oh, I have 10 minutes. That's a long time. Any questions? I know I talk a lot, so. Anyone? They probably want a break. Oh. I'll be here for a little while if anybody has questions later on. So. Oh, there's one.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm wondering what best practices have you seen social workers do in the court that were not tribal, non-tribal social workers? What are some best practices other than not turning in their court reports the day of?
In the state court, I think the social workers that have the best relationship, I think, are the ones that keep in contact most often with the tribal social workers. And by contact, I mean, everybody texts now. So, and it just can be a simple communication, just like, hey, I'm going on a visit tomorrow. And it's not so much as having to ask permission, like, hey, I'm going to go visit, Cindy tomorrow. But just giving that notice to say, hey, I'm going to go visit the family tomorrow, just giving you a heads up, or giving you a heads up that, we got another referral on them yesterday. Just that kind of mutual respect is, I think, the best practice. And it's something so simple. Because a lot of times when the tribal workers find out something after the fact, then there's nothing that they can do to help. So I think that communication is definitely the best practice I've seen. So, anybody else?
Hi, my name's Vanessa. I'm from Cal State Long Beach. Woohoo.
Hello.
So I have a question. I'm reflecting back on a case that I had because I do work for DCFS in LA County. And the child was an ICWA child. So I work in the Resource Family Support Division, so supporting our resource parents, foster parents. And so when I went to do the visit, she told me this. I didn't know that the child was an ICWA child. So I was like, shoot, I think I need to check in with the ICWA representative and see if I need the tribal representative to come with me and look through this home because it was a non-ICWA home, so the foster parent is not tribal affiliated or anything like that. And I did contact the rep a few times, actually, through email, through calls, and after a few calls, I mean, I wasn't getting anything, so my supervisor was like, well, just document your efforts. But now looking back, I'm afraid I didn't do, I feel like I should have done more. So what do you recommend in the future when tribes are not responsive? Because I know in your presentation you were like, and you know, they get 100 emails a day, so what other things can we do if we're not getting communication back?
Yeah, sometimes, you know, and I don't know how familiar you all are, but there's an annual list in the Federal Register that gives like the ICWA contact. You know, people change jobs, so sometimes those are out of date. Sometimes it's the tribal chairperson that's listed. So if you're just trying to contact one person, you know, you might not get a bounce back on an email. What I would do is if you try somebody like with a couple calls and a couple emails, I would just try a different person at the tribe, because it sounds like since you had a name, then you probably had a tribe. So I would just try like the tribal office generally, but you want to be careful, right? Because you just don't want to be like, hey, I got, you know, this kid's name and just sharing it all over. But I think that in that case, you know, and I will say, sometimes tribes don't respond, and that's the reality, you know? I mean, not every tribe's sitting there waiting for ICWA calls. So sometimes you've done your best, and that's all you can do. But in that situation, I would at least make a couple attempts to try to reach someone else at the tribe, and yes, document it. And then when you're in court, you can say, look, I tried 4 times, calls, emails, and then I tried, you know, also calls to the tribal office, was never able to get through, sent a letter twice, registered mail, nothing back, and I think that would be sufficient. Anybody else?
Okay. I just wanted to add that just because they don't respond doesn't mean that you can't give them an update. So if I had done the home visit, I would have emailed back and been like, hey, like this is how the home visit went. These were the things that we saw. These are the next steps. So just because they don't respond, because tribes have cases across the country, does not mean that you can't give them an update. So I think one thing I would add is to give them an update after, even if they don't respond.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really good point, is that just because they haven't responded for that particular time, it doesn't mean that the judge is going to be like, okay, it was over, we're never going to talk about this again. You're probably going to have to do that maybe one or a couple more times, and until there's a decision made that, you know, they're going to dispense with notice or what have you. But you're probably going to need to try to keep digging. But I guess it's just me, because these cases, I tell you, that's why we have all these appeals, because eventually somebody's going to find out, and that's why it's so important to talk to extended family members if you can, to say, look, where are the family members? Because they're the ones that can go get a hold of people at the tribe to try to, you know, find out who has the ability to get someone to intervene, or to at least give a call back to provide the tribe's, you know, wishes for the case. So it'll be an ongoing effort. So that's a really good point.
I had a question, if you have any tips on how to navigate through the public school system. Because I'm a tribal member, and I'm a guardian of a tribal member at an elementary school, and it seems like it's been so difficult. It seems like it's me against the whole entire district. Like, is there any type of tips that, I mean, I feel like, do I need to get all my women down here in ribbon skirts and park the buffalo in the parking lot for you guys to take us seriously? Because I do have a tribal member, you know, so I think that any tips on navigating through that, or if I have Because I don't have, like, there's no one to go to the district to ask for help. Really. It doesn't seem for me.
Are you asking for resources for educational based?
Well, my child is in the Lakeside Elementary School District, or the school district, and it is just seemed like it's been so complicated to get, we have different ceremonies and things like that. So for me, it's been really hard to get absences excused. The child that I have custody of lost his mom, and she is tribal. And so there was a lot of ceremonies and a lot of things, and we missed, and all of those were unexcused. So just something like that. And then when I have brought up ICWA and that he's Native, I've gotten the responses, well, ICWA's kind of confusing. Yeah, but you know.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it is challenging for us tribal members that are urban or live in town or
Right.
trying to help our tribal youth.
Yeah, and unfortunately, ICWA is very specific that it applies in removal cases for child abuse or limited, in probate cases, not in the educational setting. But I will tell you that there are laws that exist in the educational setting for, at graduation, wearing regalia, curriculum. I'm not sure, but there are some other bills working their way right now through in the education world, but maybe we can talk offline. I'm not sure about, of course, there's protection for, religious observation. I don't know if there's anything specific to, Native. There's the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, but certainly I can't imagine that there wouldn't be some type of understanding, especially in Lakeside where they're very familiar with tribal people. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you offline on that. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.